Hello everybody, welcome back to American Textbook Reading. My name is Brian and we're going over Social Book 4, Lesson 1 in this video lesson. And Lesson 1 is about different cultures. Different cultures talk about how people from different countries, different areas of the world, how do they live? What do they eat? What kind of clothes do they wear? What kind of ideas do they have? These are all different cultures. So in this unit, we will discover what people from different countries wear and how countries can share their cultures. So let's get into it. As usual, we start with the vocabulary. The first word in our vocabulary list is tradition. Tradition is very important to cultures because tradition means the customs or beliefs which are handed down from people before you. So traditions, of course, come from a very long history. And traditions are passed down from mother to daughter, father to son, and then from grandfather to grandchildren, grandmother to grandchildren. And these traditions are passed down in stories, in the way people act, in what they say, and basically how they live. So traditions, kind of think about traditions as being, I don't want to say old-fashioned, but of course they are very rooted in history and the way that previous generations did things. They will hand their traditions down to their children and so on. So those are traditions. Okay, next word, ancestor. I just mentioned this word, ancestor. Ancestor is a person in your family who lived a long time ago. Yeah, usually we talk about ancestors as people who lived, your great-grandfather, your great-great-grandfather, but your grandfather and your grandmother and also just your parents are also your ancestors, and they're still with us. Phew, good. So a person in your family who lived a long time ago, yeah, but also people who are living now are also your ancestors, right? But usually when we talk about ancestors, we're talking about the generations that came before you. So you can think about, where did my ancestors live? How did my ancestors live? Usually when we ask these questions, we're talking about, hundreds of years ago. How did people live? Or where did they come from? Especially if you're from a country that has many immigrants, many people who moved to that country, like America, where many people came from other countries. So you can say, where did my ancestors come from? Okay? Next, we have legend. A legend is a story that is handed down as part of tradition. Traditions, really, when you think about it, they are stories. Most of traditions are just stories, or they're built on stories. And stories that are repeated again and again, and they become part of a culture. And usually they have some basis in fact or real history, but of course they are very legends are kind of like the story grows and it becomes more and more fantastic or more and more impressive over time as each retelling comes about. So legends are stories that are very old, that come down from many generations ago. And of course, when you think about legends, you can think about in the West the Greek legends about the Greek heroes like Hercules and Perseus, right? These are very amazing stories. And sometimes, of course, they're a little fantastical, but they're part of a culture. And there are stories also that give reasons for why people do certain things. So they can be legends. Also, another word that's very similar to legend is myth. So myths and legends are very important to a culture. Okay. Next, we have diversity or diversity. Diversity is the quality of being different. So if you have a group of people, like this group of young people right here, you can see that they're not all the same, right? They're different, right? There's boys, there's girls, there's different races. There could even be different, I'm not sure because they're lying down, but they could be different heights, right? So diversity just means the quality of being different. people in a group who are not all the same or who all look the same or who all have the same beliefs or ideas or ways of living, but they have diverse, if there are different people in the group who look different, who think differently, who live differently, then that is a diverse group instead of a uniform. Uniform would be the opposite of diversity. Uniform. So you can have a uniform society or you can have a diverse society. Okay, but diversity just means the quality of being different. Next we have connect. Connect means to join or link together. There's a famous idea about this, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, that Kevin Bacon is a famous actor, and there's an idea that everybody knows somebody. You know somebody who is only who knows maybe less than 6 people who personally knows Kevin Bacon, a famous actor. So that's kind of like this picture here, who do you know? How close are you? How are you connected to other people? Your friends, who are their friends? Who are their relatives? How are all those connections made? So to connect is to join or link together. How are you connected to the people in your neighborhood, in your city, in your country, in the world? Right? What are those connections? Okay, the next word is take part in. This is a 3-part verb, right? To take part in. Also, we call it a phrasal verb, but it also means just to participate. Participate. Participate is a 힘들어 or difficult word, right? Participate, right? Participate, 4 syllables. Take part in is easier to say, but it's 3 words, right? Take part in. So to take part in means to join a group that is doing something together. So if you see a soccer game and you want to join the soccer game, you take part in the soccer game, or you participate in the soccer game. If you see a group of people eating lunch together, you say, oh, I want to eat lunch with them. So when you join them, you take part in that group eating lunch. You participate in their lunch, okay? But take part in means to join a group that is doing something together. Next, we have chopsticks. Chopsticks are eating utensils. Utensils in the West are a knife, fork, and spoon. In many Asian countries, they are chopsticks, and they are just a pair of sticks, small sticks, only about that long, which people use to eat food. Of course, if you're watching me from an Asian country, you're very familiar with chopsticks. If you're not, then of course, chopsticks are very commonly used in many Asian countries to eat food, especially Chinese food. And a lot of Americans do know what chopsticks are, and they do use them because Chinese food is very popular in America. And there's many Chinese restaurants, and of course, you can ask for chopsticks to eat your food at the Chinese restaurant. Okay, our last word is meal. Meal, of course, is a dish of food that you eat during the day. Usually we have 3 meals a day. Unless, of course, you're a hobbit, okay? It's from the Lord of the Rings. They have breakfast and second breakfast and so on throughout the day. But you should only eat 3 meals a day. Some people only eat 2 meals a day because they want to lose weight. But traditionally, the 3 meals a day are breakfast in the morning, lunch in the middle of the day, and dinner in the evening. And it looks like this young gentleman is eating spaghetti, probably dinner. Okay, that's a lot of spaghetti. Okay, so anyway, that's a meal. And those are our words for the lesson. Okay, we have the first idea from this lesson. We have different traditions. Now remember, traditions are practices, beliefs, things that are done by ancestors and passed down to their descendants or their children. So what are some different traditions? Of course, if you look at different countries around the world, you'll see that people will do everyday life things. They'll do them differently, and those are different traditions, different cultures. So the first one, we have Japanese people. Japanese people wear their traditional clothes called a kimono. Hai, wakarimashita. Okay. So kimono is traditional Japanese clothing. And of course, many different countries will have like their traditional dress or their traditional clothing. In Japan, they use a kimono, or they will wear a kimono. In Korea, Korean people wear their traditional clothes called a hanbok, right? And those are very colorful, and as we can see, this woman is wearing it. It's very colorful, lots of bright colors. Okay, and when you see these these types of clothes, or they're suits of clothing, you could say when you see these types of dress, although don't get confused between a woman's dress and when we say the traditional dress. They're different, right? It's not a dress, it could be something different. But when we see these, we can immediately associate, oh, they're from this country. If you see a Scotsman wearing a kilt, you know, oh, Scottish person, right? You see a person wearing a hanbok, you say, oh, from Korea. Okay, so clothes are easily distinguishable between cultures. Now, in the third box, we have people in the U.S. who came from all over the world have various traditions. So they're not talking about dress or costume, traditional costume, national costume here. And in fact, you can't really say that there's a national dress or traditional clothes for the United States because people come from all over the world. And there's no real traditional, what is the traditional costume or clothing for an American? Some people might make a joke and say, oh, t-shirt and shorts. Okay, maybe. But a lot of people do wear those. But, you know, people from America from all sorts of different cultures, all sorts of different traditions, and so there are many different types of dress. I gave you the example of Scottish. There are a lot of Scottish Americans, and when they get together and they celebrate their Scottish heritage, tradition, custom, many of them will wear Scottish clothing. I almost said dress. Be careful. Traditional clothing. And the same thing for other groups as well. Germans, Italians, Mexicans, all sorts of different ethnicities and different groups. Okay, so those are all different traditions. Next, we have sharing cultures. Now, it's very interesting to go around the world and to look at how other people live because it's really, you can expand your mind and you can gain a lot of knowledge about different ways to live. So, let's take a look at examples from different cultures around the world and see how they can be shared. For example, origami. You've probably heard of origami. Origami is Japan's paper folding tradition. And it's a tradition, and it's spread throughout the world. We see it, people in many different countries have adopted. So you can adopt a tradition or adopt part of a tradition. You can adopt a tradition, and you can do it yourself. So origami is a very popular hobby all over the world that started in Japan, but it's making little animals out of paper. And we can even see it in movies, right? There's a famous movie, Blade Runner, and one of the characters was doing this. So, you know, origami is really spread worldwide. Next, we have music. Music is a very important part of culture as well, besides stories and food and clothing. In Mexico, mariachi, I hope I pronounced that right, mariachi is the traditional music of Mexico. And you can hear mariachi singers or mariachi bands. It might be a little bit common to think of that. If you go to a Mexican restaurant, especially in the southwest of America, there might be little mariachi bands, a group of usually 3 musicians who come and they'll sing Mexican songs at your table in the restaurant. And we can also see that in TV and movies as well. So that's the traditional music of Mexico. Next, we have a tradition coming from Ghana. Ghana is a country in Africa, and we have a legend. So again, legends are old stories, you know, about maybe talking animals or heroes that do fantastic deeds. Well, from Ghana is this legend called Anansi the Spider. Anansi. When I first thought, how do you pronounce that? I looked it up. It sounds like Nancy, like a Jane, but no, don't say Nancy, just say Anansi. Anansi the Spider is a legend from Ghana, and it's a story about a spider. These types of stories that are very old are passed down from generation to generation, and in many cases they're entertaining, but in many cases also they have a story or a moral, a lesson behind the story that kind of reinforces the beliefs of a certain group of people. Okay, so those are our two ideas from the lesson. Now let's take a look at the reading. Okay, now it's time for the reading. So let's take a look. We're looking at different cultures in this lesson, of course. So we're talking about different traditions, and we'll be looking at different traditions in the reading passage. As I read, as usual, try to read along with me. Practice the pronunciation of these words. If it's not practical, if it's not a good idea to read out loud, you might be disturbing somebody around you, or read along in your mind and focus on the vocabulary, of course, and try to pick up any new words. Are you guys ready? Let's begin. Different people and cultures have different traditions. For example, in Japan, people wear traditional clothes called a kimono. Hai, wakarimashita. Okay. On the other hand, Korean people wear a hanbak. Ne, yappayo. Okay. Sometimes different cultures have similar traditions. In both Japan and Korea, people use chopsticks to eat their meals. Traditions come from ancestors who lived a long time ago. Interestingly, every culture has its own stories. Legends are interesting stories which also come from long ago. There is a lot of diversity in the United States because people there came from all over the world. Sharing customs and traditions is a way that American citizens can connect with each other. Taking part in learning about other people's traditions is a way to make their community an interesting place. It is also a good way to help Americans get along with each other. So this is a very good lesson, actually, for living in a multicultural society, It's important to learn about each other's cultures. It's interesting and it helps people get along. Okay. This reading passage is organized by main idea and then details that support that main idea. What is the main idea? The main idea is that different people and cultures have different beep. So what word did we talk about in the vocabulary that means the beliefs, the practices, the way that people think and talk about themselves? They are different traditions. Okay? So different people and cultures have different traditions. Because there's more than one tradition. There's a Japanese tradition, there's Korean tradition. There's countdowns, traditions. Okay, good. So, an example. What's an example of that? So now we need some details to support that idea. An example is, in Japan, people wear traditional clothes called a or an. They're trying to trick you there, but of course we use a because it's a kimono. A kimono. So a kimono, okay? So people wear traditional clothes called a kimono. In Korea, people wear a or an, of course it's a because it's hanbak, right? So hanbak. Okay, good. So different styles of clothing, okay? Now those are different things, right? They're different styles, but there's also a detail. It's interesting because the detail doesn't really support the main idea, but it's, it was in the passage that, sure, people have different traditions and they may have different ways of doing something, but in some ways they're also similar. So in both Japan and Korea, people use beep to eat their meals. What do they use? I have one part, right? I need another part. People use chopsticks. 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 A little hard to write with this pen. People use chopsticks to eat their meals. So yeah, that is different because not everybody does it. Outside of Asia, in Europe, they don't use chopsticks. In Africa, they don't use chopsticks. In the Americas, they don't use chopsticks unless they're at a Chinese restaurant or, of course, another type of restaurant. There are Japanese restaurants and Korean restaurants as well, of course. But typically, people use chopsticks to eat their meals in Asia. So these are different ways that people are different and they have different cultures. Of course, it depends on where you were born, where you grew up, who are your ancestors as to how you live your life. And there are so many different aspects of how to live life. What clothes are you going to wear? What food are you going to eat? How are you going to eat that food? What are the ways that you think about your family and the older people in your family? How do you treat them? How do you treat other people in your neighborhood? These can be different from country to country, and they all, when we talk about these differences, we're talking about different cultures, different traditions. And as always, it's very interesting and useful to learn about new cultures. It's exciting, it's new, and we can gain more knowledge, not only about other people, but also about ourselves when we study other cultures. And of course, it's very important to understand other people's cultures when you connect with them and you get along with them, because we all live basically in the same place. We'll all live on the same planet. So it's important to understand and get along with each other. Okay, it's turned out to be kind of a big lesson. Okay, well, thanks for studying with me. I hope you learned a lot of good vocabulary and some good ideas. Anyway, we'll see you in the next lesson. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.